I actually had a gameplay video planned for the first Descendant last year before Halloween, but I stopped recording about halfway through the story because the only interesting villain got killed off right when I was, let's say, mildly amused. Outside of that, the pacing dragged, the lore and world building was confusing, the characters had intriguing backstories but they were only mentioned in passing, and aside from the guide and alpha, even when the characters focused on the matter at hand as a team on certain missions, their dynamics were never developed. No thanks in part to the devs never letting the characters fight with you side by side on said missions like they did with Bunny at the beginning. The main character got watered down into a generic voiceless protagonist to account for the people using different descendants, which, while understandable, stifled any attempt for the player to immerse themselves in the story. The main villains caught a case of Tears Ganondorf in that they're at their most active when the game is trying to hook you in, and then jack off until their world-ending extinction-level attack that definitely wasn't thrown in smack at the end of the game to hastily gaslight you with the illusion that they weren't on pause whenever they weren't on screen, and were actually just waiting for the perfect time to inflict this attack the entire 40 hours of us fighting and losing all-powerful MacGuffins? Except they don't even do that. But nobody plays the game for the story, man. I really wanted to like this game, but as with Genshin, there were too many hoops to jump through in terms of upgrades and progression. I held out until early Season 2, but once I saw that it was the same old, kill all these enemies but in a new area, woo, the game became a distant memory. Aside from jiggle physics becoming a point for early discussion, I never heard much about it or its next season since. But weeks before its release, they were hyping up Season 3 to be one of their biggest updates yet. I even started seeing ads for it again. So I said, why the hell not? It's been 10 months, that's plenty of time for this game to turn itself around. We've got a new area to explore, new enemies and bosses, a new episode, new upgrade mechanics, and a bike for some reason. And with so many new things added, it's like I'm experiencing the honeymoon phase of the game all over again. Is the first Descendant worth playing more than a year into its lifespan? Or is what's considered to be both their second wind and their last shot another dud dressed by hype and embellishment? Season 2's first episode wasn't really much to write home about. The two new descendants they introduced, Ines and Keelan, were fine, but once again, they weren't really developed. And aside from the morsels dropped here and there about the disappearance of Ajax's wife, the episode itself merely served as a tutorial for the Void Vessel. Episode 2, however, is a major step up. We head to the Kingston Command Bunker, and right off the bat we're shown the first improvement. Back when the game first came out, the dialogue used to be delivered by a single character on screen being talked and responded to by other voices key to the conversation. It was fine for a bit, but compared to the animated cutscenes, it felt jarring at times to see characters come to his own, talk to the subject personally, and have it be like they're on intercoms. There's also no variation in their idle animation, regardless of the information, bars, being disclosed to them, aside from Jeremy's occasional eye roll and the alpha's all too relatable "I'm too old for this" expression, of course. This would make crucial moments that beg for a reaction feel almost weightless, which is detrimental considering that the fate of humanity is at stake. Today, they've turned these segments up a notch by putting each of the characters present in the conversation on screen all at the same time. Insane, I know. But gear up for this one, because they also enact a specific animation that correlates to the reaction the voice actor expressed. I know, you can catch your breath. Innovation like this just takes time to process. Poking fun aside, I'm glad they're improving. It is the bare minimum, but baby steps, you guys. One thing they did slack on, however, and I don't know why this is the way that it is, considering that it was fine before now, is that there's always some kind of an awkward pause whenever a character finishes their line. We view turned back to jarring, but now it feels like that the actor has to signal when it's the other actor's turn to talk, and the devs didn't cut the dead space when needed.
I'm officially adopting your plan. You'll have authority over troop deployment and operational details from now.
Alpha, are you serious?
Moving on, we meet up with Enzo, Nell, and Alpha for the status report on the invasion situation. The tide is within our favor, but ammunition is becoming scarce. Somehow. And the Volgas are exacerbating this issue by means of attrition, further crippling the Descendants. Nell tells us that she has a plan based on a clue from Eamon's message, and it points to an area called the Sigma Sector, the land where the Colossi and Volgas first appeared. Enzo opposes her idea, as the sector can disintegrate all matter within seconds, and since an Ironheart hasn't been used to protect him and his army, Enzo also rules out Karel ever stepping foot there. It's common sense, but Alpha notes that all of Ingris has been investigated with no signs of Karel's fleet, and yet their invasion is still going strong. It's possible that their answer lies beyond common sense. so he greenlights Nell's plan and gives her complete authority over troop deployment and operational details. Enzo pushes further, hoping that she isn't sending troops to their deaths. Offended at his mistrust, she explains that the troops will only be deployed once they've observed the sector's energy signatures via the Eye of Truth, and hands him the burden of field command for the mission, before emphasizing that her choice isn't personal. Alpha commends her on her decision, and we head back to Albion for the lowdown on the operation. Unfortunately, the Gulch was retaken by the Vulgus, and the Eye of Truth was disabled in a past mission. Fortunately, Bunny and Eugen are joining us. Unfortunately, Gley fears for Eugen's safety, mostly because of the trauma birthed from the Gulch. The one cool twist that was completely wasted, the fate of his core members. So she votes to take his place as she's more familiar with the area.
I'm sure your years of experience will see you right, but please be careful, and thank you for your concern.
I like it when you listen to me.
Lucky.
After Enzo gets teased about what happened with Nell, the operation commences. It turns out that Bunny's found a record from one of Eugen's core members, which left a trail of breadcrumbs to the result of what happened to the members kidnapped by the Order. All members without Arche were either turned into Vulgus or biomatter, which then gives Gley the thought that her daughter Dia might still be alive, just held captive. Fueled by this revelation, Gley dives deeper to find more data on Dia, but Bunny insists she pulls back, as we might get cut off by the Order. Gley continues her search, with Bunny tagging along against her wishes. Once we find out there were signs of Arche and void energy aboard the Order aircraft, and that the craft was saturated with the same void energy that came from Sigma Sector, after a not-so-humble breakdown from Bunny, Enzo surrenders and gives credit to the theory that the Vulgus are in Sigma Sector. Gley is raring for their next orders, but Enzo pleads for her to keep a level head, and sends us to go reactivate the Eye of Truth. Sure enough, the Vulgus have been spotted in Sigma Sector. Enzo then apologizes to Nell, and Alpha sends us on our way. But aw shit! Gley is joining this operation, and she's not taking no for an answer. During this exchange, we find out a couple of things. Firstly, everyone assumed that Dia was gone for good because she never had Arche. Second, Dia only got captured because Ajax gave her a letter of recommendation, and Gley has held resentment for him since. And third, Ajax is actually here to help her find Dia, even if it kills him.
That's why he's the GOAT!
So their permission to be sent to Sigma Sector first has been granted. After the encounter, we get some background on Ajax and his involvement with Dia's disappearance. He held the belief that anyone who can hold a weapon should fight for humanity, and wanted to pass his knowledge on to the next generation as a military professor. In that sense, Dia was his prized pupil, but she was exempt from war as her mother was already fighting the good fight. Dia, however, still wanted to become a soldier, like her friends and her father. Admiring her passion and under the assumption that she had already discussed it with Gley, he wrote her a letter of recommendation for the military academy. And her, along with other cadets, were deployed to train on the front lines, leading them to being ambushed. Gley had awakened her Arche but got lost in her rage and left Dia behind, which brings us to today. Ajax is using this operation as both a way to bring Gley closure and help atone for the pain he's caused her family. And now the operation commences. So what's the Sigma Sector all about, you may ask? You go to an area, you take out monsters, maybe you down a troop ship or two, you go to the next area, take out more enemies, and then you fight two bosses. It's quite innovative if you think about it. After the operation, Eugen compiled a report that pretty much proves that Arche wielders were reserved for another purpose involving structures called Arche receptors, which then brings about another operation to investigate them. But before we board the transport, Eugen is trying to convince Gley to not lose herself on a wild goose chase, reiterating that Dia can't be found in those receptors as she had no Arche. Gley counterattacks by saying that she could have been a late bloomer, and despite Eugen practically being on his knees, she ignores his plea, leading him to throw up his arms in frustration to protect himself from losing the last person he cares for the most. After another Sigma Sector rundown, we make it to the testing site, and Gley immediately gets scanning. Too bad their meddling alerted the Horde.
Please. Dia!
They're advancing!
Clay! There's too many of them!
Go! HQ, we need evac now!
Clay, we gotta get out of here. There's more of them than we thought. Clay, you listening? We gotta go now or...
Nexon's latest cash grab protects us from impending doom.
Look out!
And evac arrives just in time.
Clay!
What?
Come on! There's no time!
Yep, the waifu bait that was teased to us before infiltrating Sigma Sector was Dia the whole time. Shocker, I know. We take a detour to Kingston, and Alpha informs us that Ajax and Glay need help, and that we're the closest support unit. But before we do that, we're assigned to help Nell question the free Descendant and make sure that they aren't brainwashed. She becomes confused by Serena's answers, but Enzo finds out that she's one of the very first early generation Descendants. Her memories got fixed back at the apocalypse, and has been imprisoned ever since.
Dia, I've missed you so much, my darling daughter.
You deserve more, Glay. Now that you know she's alive, it's time you held her again. I'll stand with you until the end, Glay.
I never thought I'd say this, but thank you, Ajax.
Look out!
As the guide attempts to get Serena up to speed on everything that's happened since her imprisonment, we find out more about the receptors and their effect on Arche wielders. Those who were trapped and turned into oblivions, evil descendants, cannot have their DNA repaired because of their fusion with Vulgus cells. Nell fears that because of this, Dia cannot be captured alive. Glay thinks otherwise, and Eugen supports her this time, as he's discovered a potential way to separate Vulgus cells from human DNA after analyzing his fallen core members. Nell commands that Serena stops Glay from taking the transport, but through a mutual understanding of lost time, she too supports her mission, noting that her Arche could also be a component to helping the Oblivions. Alpha gives her the go-ahead to strap up and join Glay and warns us of the inevitable tango with the Oblivions. We overhear on comms that Glay finally caught up with Dia, but aw shit! All Oblivions in the area are now converging on her location. Luckily, Eugen and Serena have found a way to combine their strengths and help restore Oblivions, so we make haste to aid Glay, and Dia becomes our final boss. After weakening her, the treatment is underway. Dia is now back in Glay's care, a well-deserved win for humanity, lightening up a desolate time, with Corel, now displeased with his first Descendant a failure, putting his backup plan into effect. If I had to describe everything wrong with the first Descendant's main story in one word, it would be scatterbrained. The Ironhearts, the Colossi, the Vulgus, the Dimensional Wall, the Descendants, every single one of them, Clipoth, the main villains. There was way too much to explain and not nearly enough time to develop anything worthwhile, whether in terms of the characters and their motivations, or the world they're set in and the war they're fighting. And the one character who actually created a plotline worth paying attention to was killed off before anything could come of it, resetting the story back to square one, Ironheartless and meandering around in more playable Descendant trailers. One of the biggest reasons why this episode works better is because there's finally a central focus, a coherent narrative. The amount of characters utilized has been drastically shrunk down, they cut down on the expository dialogue and the long-winded science lessons and stayed quick and straight to the point, with a gradual rise in stakes to Dia's predicament and Corel's ultimate plan to mass-produce descendants of his own, which is kinda funny now that I mention Corel, because he hasn't been shown at all until the end, and he genuinely felt like a threat for once, mostly because his plan directly affected the main characters in the story, making the damage dealt much more personal over just easy-moding tension by throwing around the End of Humanity card and calling it a day. And that's definitely thanks to the richer story beats in between. The dialogue between characters both play a part in the progression of the story and bringing out each of their personalities as they converge and collide in conversations. Combined with serviceable voice acting, I was finally given a reason to care, which made emotional moments, i.e. Glay's realization to her daughter's perceived fate, heartbreaking, and their reunion uplifting. It's not groundbreaking storytelling, but it's a huge step in the right direction. Before too many steps to count backwards. Despite how much effort is being put into the storytelling, there are many factors holding it back from greatness, most of them stemming from gameplay. I've got $1 million question for you. What's the one thing missing from every major plot point during this episode? You! Wouldn't it be so cool if we could scout the Order of Truth with Bunny, or look for biosamples at the control facility with Glay? You don't think that Ajax and Lepid could have benefited from us giving extra cover fire? You don't think it would have been easier to administer Eugen's formula had we helped Serena restrain Daya? In fact, save yourselves, I'll hold her off. Wouldn't it be great to keep bonding and growing with these guys as we trek through the operation together and see them bounce off of one another as they give insights into their own backstories or opinions on what's happening currently? Maybe have these characters develop relationships with each other? One of gaming's edges over its media contemporaries is that the player doesn't have to just watch or listen. They have an opportunity to literally take control of the story's development via their own actions, which makes immersing themselves into the story easier and more effective. So you can imagine how hard that is to do now that we're essentially taking the place of the NPC. Sitting on the sidelines watching the story and characters that you spent time and effort to see through to the end move on without you. Now they can slightly get away with this by means of just saying that everyone mains a different Descendant, so everyone has a chance to immerse themselves when their main becomes the core focus. And this should ring more true for me as I main both Ajax and Glay. I had every reason to like the episode by means of this logic, but it becomes flawed the second they refer to you, the player, the one who destroyed an Ironheart with the guide to protect humanity, as Descendant. And yes, I know it wouldn't have made any sense to have the silent protag return, as the chance for duplicate Descendants is higher than ever, but if a story is focusing on specific Descendants, then why not give the player a chance to experience Descendants they haven't tried yet, and lock their choices to who is deployed on the operation at the present moment? Let the player pick who they want to play as during the set piece, having the remaining Descendants fight with you on missions. This creates an avenue for friends to join in and go through the story with you, and give you guys more playtime and revenue as, when you know, people tend to gravitate towards characters they're invested in, even more so when they themselves can play and grind through operations as that character. Speaking of, I get they want to introduce their new area or whatever, but using the story as a tutorial for it weakens the stakes, as the situation during gameplay commands a quieter call to action compared to what is said by the characters during cutscenes. Uh-oh guys, the Volgas are causing for our ammo to run out. Our production isn't keeping up. Uh-oh guys, the Volgas retook the White Knight Gulch, and we need to clear them out before we can take control of the Eye of Truth. Not only are the Volgas easy mode, as their levels don't scale being that we're just repeating an original mission, but the Volgas that retook White Knight Gulch were wiped out in their entirety by 3 Descendants in one fell swoop. In a single area of the Gulch! How did I ascertain this? Because after that mission, aside from returning to the Eye of Truth, we just waltz around like we own the place. That's right, humanity, that's us. The guys who breed super soldiers with supernatural abilities lost all of the Gulch to a bunch of goons. Glay's going in too far. If we're not careful, we could get cut off in a place like this. The way the main story addressed this problem in the past was by means of controlled, linear, structured levels called infiltration operations, whose only purpose was to progress the story. Admittedly, these levels were copy and paste. They all called for you to be able to take out whole bosses in a flash, as their health and or shield regen was incredibly fast, and it was the only time the story ever progressed in the first place, but these levels being separated from the overworld made them feel official and important. You felt you had to pay attention because critical events were transpiring. In these episodes after, most of the time you're thinking that you're doing a run-of-the-mill grind, only remembering that you're in a story event because of the dialogue and occasional cutscene or conversation that occurs from time to time, which goes double for my comment on the story being a tutorial for Sigma Sector. This becomes more true when you bring up the bosses. Aside from Greg and Alzarok, the reasons to fear any of the bosses past and present are purely superficial. Who are these guys? What's their allegiance to Karel? Why should we consider them a threat? They're stronger than normal Volgas with special mechanics that have scary voices and lines. It's not like the regular Volgas you've downed a million times, so you should fear them for that reason and that reason alone. The same thing happens in this episode, except we don't even get any lines or the crumbs of a background we used to get from the previous fights. Daya is said to be the strongest of the Oblivions, but the only reason why her boss fight didn't end in the 30 seconds it should've was merely because you couldn't damage her during her post-health bar attack. And you might say, it's because you're endgame ready doing mid-game challenges. And I'd reply with, I don't have a choice. There's so many enemy buffs, huge shields, and instances of light speed health regen that if you're not leveled significantly higher than the enemy, they will tire you out in a battle of attrition. Either that or you just run out of time. And it, once again, weakens the stakes because considering that the enemies have to be dead before they can lay a finger on you, why should we and Albion be scared of such cannon fodder, let alone believe that they'd stand a chance against multiple Descendants? What, because the story tells us so? Alright, let me schedule a lobotomy first and I'll get back to you. The story itself is an improvement, but that's not even close to half the battle. Everything outside of it left it to be downgraded to a bunch of glorified cutscenes, in between what is considered to be business as usual, choking any life out of whatever the story had to offer. A huge step forward and too many steps to count back to square one. To Albion, where we talk about Corell's next move to the Axion Plains. To get information on it, we enter Daya's mind, where we find out that Corell's home planet is being destroyed by the Colossi, and the Ironhearts are the only way he can save it. His soldier, the Dominator, begs for him to join forces with the Descendants, so he uses Daya to awaken other Descendants to restore the Ironhearts we destroyed. Nell's been feeling off since the previous operation, and Alpha's finally holding it down in a new area, so we meet up with them to talk about Daya's memories, and they gather that this may be Corell's final stand. I know that this isn't the end of the game because no company creates games like these with any plan for finality, but it's laughable how after being background music for most of the story, he finally became an imposing presence hyped up to have some kind of master plan brewing at the end of Season 2, only for it all to be completely retconned, forcing him into a corner out of nowhere so he can fast travel the development needed to begin the War to End All Wars plotline. Could this be a stop while we're ahead response, or a please player base come back, this is our endgame moment response to their low player counts? I'll let you guys decide, but it's funny no matter the answer. After they finish their debriefing, Alpha gives Enzo and Nell a chance to breathe. Without any prior development, they start giving hints that Enzo has a crush on Nell. And by hints, I mean smacking you over the top of the head repeatedly, as not only does he have a crush on Nell, he's been crushing on her for a long time because he's gonna ask her to marry him. They were dating the whole time? But it doesn't matter because Nell kills the mood with a story about how she sent soldiers to their deaths, prompting an argument about whether it's morally good to sacrifice a few to save many. It's an okay moment, but it's such a tonal shift from what we just had like a minute ago. She asked Alpha the same question and he gave a pretty good answer.
I used to make decisions rationally, just like the previous Alpha did. But it's different now. I want us to survive together, or if it comes to it, die together. Damn. I must be getting sentimental in my old age. Look out!
But oh no, the transport was shot out of the sky by the dimensional breach, and we're to be expected at the Axion Plains ASAP. Enzo leaves to go to the repeating signal from the missing transport, and not-so-serious Nell commences the operation. Onward we go to the first Descendant saving grace, the Axion Plains. A new open world outside of Ingris to explore via hoverbike. What new challenges will arise? What treasure will we discover? What danger lies hidden?
Oh shit! Oh shit!
This can't be. Have I been power crept? This surprised me a bit because while this isn't my first rodeo with power creeping, I've never encountered a situation that widened the gap this far. So I guess this is a good time as any to halt the story for now and get down to the juicier part. The grind. And what better way to do that than to build up a new Descendant? After building Glay, I was reluctant to try building any other Descendants because the grind is... Okay, look, the grind is some cock and balls. I'm sorry, there's no other way to describe it. I mean, to start, there are 3 parts you have to research and a code you have to grind for in order to research a Descendant. To get the 3 parts needed, you have to look for certain materials that can be found via research boxes, main story operations, and encrypted vaults.
Damn it!
Pretty much all of them can be gained rather quickly and are mostly obtained by just playing the game. Now the blueprints are where things get messy. First, you have to find what is called an amorphous material. How do you get the amorphous material, you may ask? It depends. Some are in Volga strategic outposts at a 20 to 25% drop rate, others can be guaranteed in 400 plus dungeons. But that's not to mention that the reward inside is also up to chance, and the blueprint you're looking for is competing with and possibly losing to other much less useful legendary weapon / epic Descendant blueprints. I mean, that doesn't sound too bad. If I grab enough, I can just open them up. How do I open this? I'm glad you asked, dear player. After clearing either a Void Fusion mission or a specific Colossi, they'll drop an orb that'll allow you to access the material's contents. Okay, tedious and a bit cheap, but I got time to kill, so let me grab my best gear, clear it down, and get my reward. Oh, that's okay. Just let me try and get... Oh, I forgot to tell you, you have to repeat the mission for every single amorphous material you have. And you have to repeat this exact process 4 times to max out legendary weapon abilities. Okay, took me a long while, but I finally got the Descendant. Now to test her. Hold on there, slugger. It's great you got what you wanted, but your shiny new Descendant's gonna be up a creek without a paddle and a canoe. You gotta get the right mods for your module system. After all, you can't use the abilities your Descendants have without boosting their attributes and lowering their cooldowns. I guess you're right, so how do I do that? So first things first, you have to max out your Descendant, which can be done with your eyes closed, so that leaves us with step 2. Max out your modules. See, I've tried that on my main, but I ran out of space. That means it's time to get an item called an Energy Activator, which can be researched by finding materials via research boxes, main story operations, and encrypted vaults. Now the blueprints? The blueprints are where things get messy. First, you have to find what is called an amorphous material. Wait, hold on. Isn't this exactly what you said about researching Descendants? Oh shit. I guess you're right about that. Okay, then once you hit gold on the 6% drop rate... A what percent drop rate? Your module capacity will be increased significantly, giving you plenty of space to upgrade its full again. Oh, that's my bad. I completely forgot to tell you, but don't fret. This is merely a hiccup, a little bump in the road, if you will. Now, do you see those logos on the top of your modules? The capacity these mods take up can be reduced by catalyzing the slots to match the logo the mod dons. But how do you catalyze module slots? So there are these things called crystallization catalysts that have to be researched by finding materials that can be found via research boxes, main story operations. But the blueprints are where things get messy. I got it. So now, yeah, you have to remax out your Descendant every time you want to catalyze a slot. And everything I've just said about modding Descendants goes for your weapons as well. But it's okay because leveling up should be no problem, right? Middlemen, that's what they've chosen. And we haven't even touched on the reactors, or the components, or the substats for both those and the weapons. People saw this game for what it was and clocked out in an instant, including me. So after, almost a year since then, their biggest problem had to be alleviated by now, right? At least by a smidge. Surprisingly enough, it looks like it is. I picked Old Bunny to build because gotta go fast, and her blueprints are actually somewhat obtainable now. Oh, I'm sorry, they were always this easy to get? When I first heard people say that Old Bunny was the easiest to research, I assumed they meant it was because her grind was more streamlined than the rest, but it was actually because her blueprint drop percentages were at a reasonable rate. I checked Glay, who was considered to be the hardest to get, and her percentages and farms were exactly the same. However, as I was editing this, they introduced a new terminal called the Shaping Device, which allows you to shape any amorphous material in one place, all in one sitting, at no extra cost. Anyway, I finally researched Bunny, and I already have my maxed out Thunder Cage and Reversed Fate from Glay, so it's modding time. Energy activators are still just as difficult to research, but I got her to level 40 in no time thanks to the revamped special operations, which can get either your Descendant or your weapon proficiency maxed out in 2 runs or less, depending on whether or not you have XP boosts, which are given out almost daily. Which then comes the moment of truth. Do we still have our levels reset after a slot is catalyzed? 10 months, guys. 10 whole... Wait a second now. What about the post-endgame upgrading, Dara? Surely that's gotta be interesting. If I have to. So Season 3 introduced 2 new ways to gain more power. Augments and Arche tuning. After the deformed problem children that are the oddly specific buffs of the inversion reinforcements, these take up a much more simpler tone. Augments can be used for both your weapons and your components, boosting things like defense, elemental resistance, fire rate, and reload time. To put it clearly, it's extra substats. So how can I augment my weapons and components? To start off, you have to unlock the core of your weapon. Components can be augmented right out the box. Fortunately, they give you the core binder needed for free during the tutorial, but for those of you who want to unlock the cores of multiple weapons, you can craft a core binder by using Void Abyss metal fragments, rolls right off the tongue, which can be gained by clearing infiltration operations or operations in the Axion Plains. As you fight through Sigma Sector, you'll notice these little orbs with Final Fantasy logos beside them that vary in power characterized by how high the number is, going all the way to 10. Now that you have the materials needed, how does the augmenting work? It's RNG. It's always RNG, with, wait for it, yet another currency to spend and grind for. And as per usual, the useful stats that the devs themselves know that everyone has to have are competing with and possibly losing to a bunch of less useful stats that the devs themselves know have no business being there but are there regardless to muddle the pool with filler and suck the life force. Push the player to grind more until they get the augment they want, blah blah blah, let's move on. Arche tuning is basically a regular skill tree that require points to gain upgrades. You get points by leveling up your unique Arche factor, which can be done by grinding out the Sigma sec.
It's the same old fucking shit!
The worst part is that you really need both of these upgrades and to get as close to maxing them out as possible, because your power level before and after augments and tuning differ heavily down to the frickin' decimal. Especially so in terms of augments, the best of which can only be obtained by the final level in the Void Erosion, where the enemy's levels are 260. I made it to about level 9 by the skin of my teeth, powering through it solo against my will because the queue times for these are abysmal, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm not going to be able to clear it, at least not without some serious augmentation and tuning, not because I die too fast, not because the enemy is too strong, but because the enemy has too much goddamn health. A crazy spike in health, in fact, considering how easy level 8 was. At that point, I gave up and hoped to God that I was strong enough for the Axion Plains. And luckily I was. Just barely. So without further ado, let's finish the story and get the hell out of here, shall we? After rendezvousing back to Kingston, Enzo and not-so-serious Nell try to recap, but surprise! Corel has infiltrated their channel and gave Albion an offer to have a bit of a chat, using Alpha and Nell as leverage. Enzo accepts without hesitation, but not-so-serious Nell fears that it's a trap. Enzo doesn't budge, so she asks for operational command, to have troops and snipers on standby, and after being given command, she was ordered to not give her troops the motion to attack first. Enzo and Corel meet. For the first time since literally the beginning, Albion and Corel are met face to face. He sets the stage, repeating the situation his soldier gave him before crushing Harris. Apparently him sitting on the sidelines while we dusted everything he threw at us was all a part of his evil plan for the Descendants to awaken their Arche as, by utilizing the Ironheart particles spread throughout the Descendants, because somehow the Ironheart returned, he can create a new Ironheart by fusing them all together, and upon its creation, humanity will be spared. Yet instead of using his godlike power to press them for an immediate answer, he lets them go. Why? And we return to Albion. The Descendants are questioning why they weren't given the order to take out Corel, and I assume that he would have just been bulletproof, but we get no concrete answer until we talk to Enzo, who then explains that he halted the order because he was actually considering Corel's offer.
Stop it, you bastard!
So that was a fucking lie.
Playing back into his conversation with Nell earlier in the episode, he's struggling with the decision to sacrifice a few to save many, also meaning that he wouldn't be able to marry Nell if he accepted. Yujin lets us know that Harris is on her way to recovery due to Arche, although she's hit with Survivor's Guild. We finally get the missing pieces as to how they got captured. After getting sucked into the breach, they lost control straight into the path of Corel's ship. How convenient. And were taken in to be tortured for war-deciding information. Harris further expresses her disdain towards her inaction, while Yujin once again plays moral support, before the guide calls for us to analyze the Arche within the breach. After another Axion Plain run, we turn to Nell in Corel's ship, who is in a war of her own with her inner demons, constantly relaying her grievances with the soldiers she's sacrificed. It's well animated, the tone is haunting and fast-paced, and Alpha's voice actor absolutely murdered his role here.
You hid, far from the front, warm and safe. Yes?
He could be a great villain in a better story with that laugh. It turns out that this was the torture that Harris was referring to, a hell crafted by Eamon's mind control, because that's his thing now apparently, and she breaks away from it by making peace with her past and awakening her Arche.
No way!
Released from their prison, Nell and Alpha make their escape before Corel crashes the party. He entraps and kills Alpha, oh, he's just in danger somehow, and Nell is thrown into the vacuum of space, back into Enzo's arms. All of the Descendants rally together, have a big speech, and begin the operation to save Alpha.
That can't be it. Where's the rest of it?
Anyone else feel like we skipped a season or something? Harris and Blair suddenly became prominent figures and supposedly good friends with Nell and Enzo, so much so that they heavily imply that Harris has been playing matchmaker with the two of them. Couldn't possibly be because they're prepping for the out-of-nowhere marketable NPC that's getting a suspicious amount of screen time to become a playable character in the future. Enzo has been dating Nell for a long while, or at least I hope he has, even though until the previous episode, Nell and Enzo's interactions were purely cordial. Couldn't possibly be a half-baked last-minute attempt at giving Corel something to leverage against Enzo. Nell apparently had to sacrifice soldiers and it's only ever been mentioned now, despite her never once giving out orders that crucial in the entirety of this game's story? Couldn't possibly be a means to hastily emphasize the theme of this episode to garner emotional resonance, speedrun to the payoffs, and give Enzo an excuse to not end the story with a shot to Corel's head. Add that the gameplay problem from the previous episode is still prevalent here, it's needless to say that this episode was rushed, egregiously so. And I have no doubts that this was a knee-jerk reaction to the damage dealt by the earlier seasons. It was just fan service. Fan service everywhere. Nexon, I understand that you're trying to gun for an endgame moment, but did you forget that you have to develop a story with characters worth caring about first? All in all, there isn't much more I can say about the story or the rest of this game in general. Sure, I haven't talked about the lounge, but to be frank, although it too is a predatory free-to-play game with 500 different currencies, DOAX did and still does this much, much better. In more ways than one. But what about the new update to the Void Vessel? Business as usual with different rewards and a bigger boss. Next. Hold on though, Dara. Those rewards involve their new melee weapons. And I actually was going to grind for them, but I can't wrap my head around redoing what I've already done 1,000 times before for flashy but ultimately weightless combat with a melee weapon that consumes ammo for some reason. And before you say it, as I was writing this, they have released their next episode, and it looks like it might be the second of a 3-part series. Thing is, I just don't care anymore. The Axion Plains did nothing to enhance the gameplay loop in any way, shape, or form. You shoot enemies and fight bosses like you have been since the game's inception, but this time you have to complete challenges or survive until time runs out. The map itself is dull and no fun to explore, as there's barely any landmarks or structures that pique my interest. And even if there were, it's not like there would be any special weapons or accessories hidden inside, as they'd rather you use your credit card for all that instead. So why bother? The bike's animations are janky to look at, there's no resistance behind quick turns, and the sense of speed just zooms out the camera, so not even traversing the plains is any bit exciting. The story looked to be going in the right direction, but it was shot down to be replaced by a desperate attempt to save their dwindling fanbase. The grind still sucks, the Descendant building and researching are still demanding as all hell, and funniest of all, I still can't change the color of my Descendant's outfit without spending money, nor can I take off certain pieces of an ensemble. Let me remove the coat, you heathens! I'm sorry guys, but no. The first Descendant, even more than a year after its release, isn't worth coming back to, let alone getting into for the first time. I really wanted Nexon to learn from their mistakes. You might think I'm joking, but I'm being serious. I like looter shooters, and I like waifus. This was supposed to be a match made in heaven for me, and I thought it was, at least for a little bit, as I saw that most of the microtransactions were cosmetic. But in my bliss, I failed to remember that time too is itself a currency. And so many of these games, free-to-play or not, utilize whatever shortcuts and cheap tactics they can to suck away as much of your time as possible with as little effort as possible. And I'm done tolerating it, regardless of how much I like whatever's unique about the game doing it. So long, the first Descendant, and so long, Weapon Plaque Glay. You deserved a minigun and a coattail that didn't stick. Thank you all for watching, Tamer Supremacy, and have a spectacular rest of your day.
I don't want to be the comic relief!
See that guide? Mine's bigger than his.